Welcome to the Fear and Greed Business Interview. I'm Sean Aylmer. The pandemic reminded the world of the importance of vaccines and demonstrated the extraordinary ability of health professionals to innovate. The latest developments in medical technology are another giant leap forward. Needle-free vaccines might sound a little bit like science fiction, but clinical trials have shown it's not just possible, but it can improve the effectiveness of a vaccine immune response. My guest today is David Hoey, the President and CEO of Vaxxas, the company behind this needle-free technology. Vaxxas works across the US and Australia, developing and commercialising its products in Brisbane. The Brisbane health sector is the fastest growing in Australia, and in medical and pharmaceutical products, growth in Brisbane has occurred 7 times faster than the rest of Australia. Companies in this space are benefiting from commercial and research partnerships, as well as the MedTech Accelerator Program, an initiative of the Brisbane Economic Development Agency, a great supporter of this podcast. As I mentioned, I'm joined today by David Hoey, the President and CEO of Vaxxas. David, welcome to Fear and Greed.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Let's start at the very beginning. Tell me about the technology. How does it work?
So, the technology, has its origins at the University of Queensland, at the Australian Institute for Biotechnology and Nanoengineering. And Vaxxas was actually formed in 2011, licensing the technology out of the university. And so our path since then has been to transform the technology essentially from working in small models, in mice, through to scaling it to larger animal models and then into humans for clinical studies. So in biotech, I say that when you're doing development in biotech, you wish you were in information technology because we're about 14 years into the process so far, and we've invested about $250 million to get to the current point. But we've now done a whole series of, 5 completed phase 1 studies, more than 500 people. So we know the technology works. And, I can describe it to you in a nutshell, if you're ready.
Yep, please describe the technology in English, David, in English.
In English. Well, it's a fun space to work in, first of all, because we're working in a field that really hasn't seen fundamental innovation for more than 170 years. I mean, the needle and syringe is what we use to inject vaccines because we have a needle. What we know based on modern immunology is that the immune cells are actually not in the muscle. Most of the immune cells in your body are in fact in the surfaces. So in the skin, in mucosal surfaces, where you have about 10,000 times the density of immune cells. And so we've developed technology that instead of injecting vaccine into muscle, enables us to apply a small patch to the skin for about 10 seconds, and we deposit the vaccine just underneath the surface of the skin, basically into the arms of the waiting immune cells. And that way they are able to very efficiently pick up the vaccine, and it's still processed, immunologically in the same way by the lymph nodes, etc. But what it means is that we have a dramatically more efficient and effective way of getting a response to a vaccine, and that's just the start of good things.
Is it applicable to all vaccines?
It is. So, in the broader sense, you could say this is a potential replacement to needle and syringe for all vaccinations. Now, of course, for those of us who like needles, I can assure you we've done the research and it's a pretty small population. It doesn't make much difference. But there is actually, in the field of vaccines, there is a lot of, because vaccines are optional. I mean, that when you're getting a therapeutic injection, you want it because you're sick. You're getting vaccines because you're healthy, and when you're healthy, and so it's a choice. And apprehension or anxiety around needles is actually one of the real barriers to it. So a technology like ours can lift that veil completely. And there are other advantages. The way we put the vaccine onto the patch, it's dry, so it can be stored outside of refrigeration, and that this means for things like our seasonal flu vaccine can be stable at 40 degrees centigrade for more than a year, as opposed to having to have this kind of tightly controlled refrigeration distribution. So, we have 2 ways that we look at the world. One in the high income countries where we have the benefits of things like refrigeration and skilled administration. We take vaccines for granted, but most of the world's population live where there's poor infrastructure and not much skilled administration for healthcare, where we can extend the reach of vaccines into places that are difficult or impossible to reach with vaccines, and that can be a real game changer.
You talked about the trials, starting with mice and going through to humans. Again, one thing that amazes me when you read about these clinical trials, just like how it's discovered. Who came up with the idea? How do you actually migrate that to trialing it on mice, to trialing it in humans, right? That process.
Right. That's the kind of like the seed of innovation. You're right, because folks have actually known for, many decades that the immune cells are actually, these classes of immune cells are in the skin. If you really want to put vaccine somewhere, that's the place to do it. There was a technique developed to use a needle, which requires the needle to be kind of put obliquely into the skin and inserted in a way that you really don't want to imagine getting vaccinated that way. And so it's really then taking, the knowledge that, that's where the immune cells are, and then reducing to practice a device that can achieve that. And that's what the University of Queensland, and it was Professor Mark Kendall at the AIBN who came up with that original innovation, essentially a controlled way to place the vaccine right where those immune cells are. Now, from going into demonstrating, you get a response, in mice is one thing. When you want to take the technology into humans, it's a completely different thing. You have to work out how it's a medical device that we make that contains the patch that is coated with vaccine. So it is a product that needs to be made in a sterile environment. And our facility at Hamilton North Shore, we have clean rooms, and that we have highly skilled operators that enable us to take the sterilized components of the device, apply the vaccine in a sterile environment and seal it. And then it's ready for use then in human clinical trials. And I said, we've become very skilled at this. We've completed 5 really successful phase 1 studies to date. We're just completing a very large study for the US government, about 260 people. I'm using actually a pre-pandemic influenza vaccine from the US stockpile. And so we've become, super skilled in how to produce great material for clinical studies. And that's the stepping stone to the commercial market.
Stay with me, David. We'll be back in a minute. My guest this morning is David Hoey, President and CEO of Vaxxas. Before the break, you kind of gave us a rundown of how we got to where we are today. What's the size of the prize here, David?
The size of the prize is very large. The global vaccine market is about 130 billion. And as we discussed earlier, the technology itself is, you could think of it essentially as a replacement for needle and syringe. So there is not an existing vaccine or a vaccine in development. This is not applicable to. So we see ourselves as being able to enter many of the disease segments that are currently occupied by needle and syringe, and simply, garnering market share because we know we have very strong consumer preference. But there are also vaccines that are in development, and that we can confer special properties, if you like, to those vaccines. We tend to generate a faster and a higher immune response, and that, a different flavor of immune response. You call it a broader immune response to vaccines. So this can sort of be transformative over time. I like to think if we fast forward, sort of 20 years from now, most vaccines will be given by patch administration because that's where the immune cells are, and that we hope that most of those patches are ours.
So I hope for your sake they are too. How close are we to rolling, or are you to rolling it out?
Very close. So the facility at Brisbane's North Shore, it's a bespoke facility and fantastic. We're about to start producing material for our later stage studies, so phase 2 and phase 3, and then our first commercial products. We're somewhere between 3 and 5 years out. If the trials go smoothly, maybe 2028 for registration of our first products, or a year or two after. But in the biotech landscape, that's incredibly close. So it's very exciting.
You mentioned Brisbane a few times. It seems to be the place to be, medtech, biotech, tech. I mean, there's a few listed companies here. Technology One, for example, Brisbane-based company that everyone loves Technology One at the moment, but it just seems to be the place at the moment.
Yeah, it's a fantastic place, to, first of all, incubate. And then in our case, if you take it from a concept to a company that in 2011 had 6 people and has since then raised $100 million or so in conventional venture finance, and another $180 million in non-dilutive funding from folks like, the US government, pharmaceutical companies. We're now about 170 people. And that most of the investment, about $250 million so far, is spent locally into the local economy. And so we're part of this growing biotech kernel, an ecosystem that is fantastic, because we've sort of ridden a wave with a lot of other companies. We've got the big ones, of course, that we look at and want to emulate, folks like Cochlear, et cetera, that are, already famous, shall we say. But we're part of a growing community. And the more of us that they get to be, the snowball gets bigger. And, it's fantastic too, because institutions like the University of Queensland churn out highly skilled scientists and engineers that are our target hiring base. And so we're a great, recruitment tool, keep those people local and continue to feed back into the system. And, Brisbane is a great climate in more ways than one. Economically, literally to recruit people to come here even from overseas is very, very easy. And so we're super excited about what we've been able to achieve locally, but also what the ecosystem has given back to us.
I mean, there is that sense of paying forward, like kind of fostering the next generation of healthcare startups, because you guys do that, don't you?
We do. We're actively involved in the mentoring programs that BETA organizes. One of the many activities that BETA do to sort of foster, big biotech companies start as small biotech companies which start as an idea, and that BETA have got sort of from the kernel of an idea through how do you nurture these companies that are a concept. We do mentoring with early stage companies. BETA also have active programs to introduce companies when they're coming into the stage when they need to raise their first capital, not just to the Australian community, but to international audiences, particularly in the US, the big biotech conferences here, JP Morgan, et cetera. BETA have done a phenomenal job. We, by the way, participate in those programs, so we benefit from them, but we also help other companies to participate across the range.
To round it off, David, what next for Vaxxas? So what do we expect for the next 5 years?
5 years. Oh boy. There's lots of things going on. Out at our facility at North Shore, we're installing our first robotic systems for manufacturing, which is a really exciting transition time. We're gearing up for our first mid-stage, so phase 2 and phase 3 studies. We're engaging with lots of government entities, not just the US government and pharma. So exciting new vaccine programs. A heck of a lot going on. And of course, most importantly, the launch of our first products. Really exciting.
David, thank you for talking to Fear and Greed.
Great. Thanks very much, Sean.
That was David Hoey, President and CEO of Vaxxas, which works with the Brisbane Economic Development Agency. David was talking about BETA. That's it. Brisbane Economic Development Agency, a great supporter of this podcast. This is the Fear and Greed Business Interview. Join us every morning for the full episode of Fear and Greed, business news you can use. I'm Sean Aylmer. Enjoy your day.